Listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Butler with Faith Trust Institute, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar, Men's Role in Ending Violence. I'll introduce our presenter in a moment, but first a few technical details. First of all, you should be able to hear me on your speakers or through your phone. If you're having problems with the volume, I suggest you make sure that your headset is plugged in and the volume is turned up. If you're having technical problems, I recommend you exit the webinar, return to the link in your email, and then try to connect again. We welcome your questions throughout the presentation. We'll have about 15 minutes at the end to answer as many questions as possible. You can send your questions anytime to me using the question box on the right side panel of your screen. I'll hold on to all the questions until the presentation is completed. The slides you see today will be emailed to you as a PDF later this afternoon, so you'll have them as a resource. Lastly, we're recording this webinar to make it available on our website for those who can't join us for the live session, so we welcome those who may be listening to the recording as well. We want to thank the United Methodist Women for sponsoring this webinar. They have sponsored a series of 5 in 2014 as part of their domestic violence awareness campaign. The United Methodist Women's mission is to provide opportunities to grow spiritually, to equip women and girls to be leaders, provide transformative educational experiences, organize for growth and flexibility, and work for justice through service and advocacy. Please visit unitedmethodistwomen.org to read more about the great work that they're doing, and we thank them again for their sponsorship. Our presenter today is Reverend Al Miles. Reverend Miles is a nationally recognized trainer on domestic violence and teen dating violence. He's the coordinator of the Hospital Ministry Department for Pacific Health Ministry at the Queens Medical Center in Honolulu, Hawaii. Al's the author of several books, including Domestic Violence, What Every Pastor Needs to Know, and Ending Violence in Teen Dating Relationships, a resource for parents and pastors. We're delighted to have him with us today. Audience members, if you have questions, please submit them anytime using the question box. And Al, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you very much. And I want to thank you and United Methodist Women and Faith Trust Institute for having me come and share one of my passions, and that passion being to engage more men and get involved in ending domestic violence. As always, when we're talking about this particular topic, I want to acknowledge that it is a difficult topic, and I realize that some of the people who are hearing my voice are themselves victim survivors, and some might be offenders of domestic violence. If you are a victim survivor, I encourage you to get the help that you need. And I am moved to say that it is not your fault. You did not cause the abuse, and you cannot stop the abuse. But you can get help for yourselves. If you are an offender, I'm saying get the help that you need, and don't blame other people or other things for the abuse that you perpetrate. Having said that, I think it's important that we have a working definition. Next slide, please. Domestic violence, also called intimate partner violence, is a pattern of abusive behavior. And there are various tactics that are used in situations of domestic violence. There's coercion, there's deception, there's harassment and humiliation, there's manipulation, and/or there's force. And the goal in domestic violence is to establish and maintain power and control over a person's current or former intimate partner. Let me say a little bit more about that. Domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior. It is not about someone who has snapped. It is not about someone who is under so much stress that he's hauled off and hit his intimate partner or cursed his intimate partner. It's not about job stress. It's not about crying children or barking dogs. and it's most certainly not about the victim survivor being the cause of it. And let me say, for the spiritual leaders and laity who are joining us, it's not about Satan or some other evil spirit. It is a pattern of abusive behavior, and in that pattern, the offender uses coercion and deception and harassment and humiliation, manipulation and or force to get what he wants when he wants it. Next slide, please. Anyone in a teen intimate partnership or an adult intimate partnership can be victimized. Anyone in a teen or an adult partnership, intimate partnership, can be the victimizer. But in adult intimate relationships, the vast majority of victim survivors will be female. And in an adult intimate partnership, the vast majority of offenders will be male. More than 85% of victim survivors are female, and more than 90% of offenders are male. The difference in the percentage is the fact that males abuse other males in intimate partnerships between homosexuals. To some people who are joining us, there could be some pushback saying, but I know that some women violate their male intimate partners. This is true, a very small percentage. And there are some women who violate female intimate partners. Again, a small percentage. As you can see, some of the stats nationally, more than 2 million women in the United States are assaulted each year by an intimate partner, according to the American Medical Association. And more than a quarter of surveyed women say they have been raped or physically assaulted by a current or former spouse or partner, according to the National Institute of Justice Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Bear in mind, those national statistics deal mostly with physical assaults. Much of the assaults are emotional, psychological, and spiritual in nature, so the number is really underreported. The current numbers that we talk about is probably 1 in 3 women will experience some form of intimate partner violence in her lifetime. Next slide, please. When I was being trained 3 decades ago around intimate partner violence, a psychologist, Dr. Kevin Hamburger, used to say to me that the tactics that offenders use are tactics that anyone could imagine and things that would be unimaginable. And he's right about that. There are emotional abuse tactics, psychological abuse tactics, physical abuse tactics, sexual abuse tactics, spiritual abuse tactics. Teasing those out a little bit, emotional abuse tactics usually start off by the offender trying to separate his female intimate partner from those things that she values: her family, her friends, what she's studying, how she worships, what she values. One woman told me recently, I was at a conference in Southern California, and one of the survivors who talked to me said she had met a man that she found attractive, and they went to dinner, and it was a steak place, and she ordered a mini steak, and as she made the order, with the wait person still standing there, the man that she had just met for the first time said, you know, you have a few extra pounds on you. Why don't you just eat a salad? This is someone she doesn't know, and he starts trying to dictate what she eats. Offenders will dictate what their survivors eat, how they can and cannot dress, the style of their hair, the length of their hair, the color of their hair, will dictate when their survivors can study, when the survivors can worship, and definitely dictate relationships. That's how it usually starts out in terms of an emotional level. Psychologically, The psychological abuse tactics are really hard to categorize and hard to define. But many survivors will talk about when men that have violated them had a Jekyll and Hyde, a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde look. So one moment sweet as punch, the next moment just devastatingly mean. And or all of a sudden he will take a skillet and throw it, never intending to hit his survivor, his victim, but hit it, and the noise that hit the wall just makes her just terrified of him. In a most chilling story, a survivor told me that it was her husband actually, and he wanted to make love one night, and she said, no, not tonight. And she said her husband stood up, went over to the brick wall, and began to beat the brick wall with his bare fist until his fist and the wall were totally bloody. He then, without washing his hands or cleaning the wall, got into bed and fell asleep. The psychological abuse tactic there was the woman clearly knew that that wall was her body. So it's crazy making, it's dictating what a woman wears, who she can see, it's controlling all the finances. There are also sexual abuse tactics, and they do not limit themselves to forced sexual intercourse, do not limit themselves to sexual assault. It's once again trying to dictate to a female intimate partner what she can wear, or referring to a female intimate partner by sexual body parts such as a cunt or a boob. These vile and vulgar terms are used by men who claim to be Christian who are abusers, just as they are used by men who would never dart in the door of a church. Emotional, psychological, sexual abuse tactics also involve demeaning women, referring to them as bitches or sluts or hoes or stupid or ugly or fat or skinny. Once again, it's important for us who are on the webinar to understand that this is not just done by men who are in the secular world, but men who are in the Christian and other religious world who are offenders. You can see on the slide that perpetrators will also make threats to kill themselves, to kill their victims, to kill the caregivers, family members, friends, and pets, as well as destruction of items meaningful to victims. Let me say a little bit more about that. This one woman, we'll call her Mary. This is not her real name. Mary told me the chilling story recently about the heirlooms that were destroyed that had been given to her by her grandmother. Irreplaceable items, and they sat on a shelf, high on a shelf. And Mary said that her husband, Fred, not his real name, one day was angry about something or nothing, and on that same shelf, the first 3 rows were filled with trophies, golfing trophies, bowling trophies that Fred had earned. But when Fred lost it, started seeming crazy, starting losing control, he didn't touch any of the trophies that belonged to him. Instead, he broke all the heirlooms that Mary had treasured so well. Was he crazy? No. It's a psychological abuse tactic to make him seem crazy and to instill fear in Mary. One tactic that I have not talked about that we're going to spend more time talking about is spiritual abuse tactics. This is the misuse, in the Christian context, is the misuse of God, Jesus Christ, the Hebrew Bible, the Christian scriptures, culture, family practices, to somehow support male entitlement, male privilege, and to encourage and sometimes demand the subjugation of females. Spiritual abuse tactics are particularly insidious to women of faith because they are told that somehow they don't measure up to God, who is often in those situations a male-centered God, a father God. And they don't measure up, and they feel second class, and they have to assume a subservient role. I will often describe this tactic as blasphemous because it's taking what is intended to be good, that is the equality of females and males, the equal value of females and males, the equal love that God and Christ has for females and males, and doing harm to support male dominance and male privilege. Next slide, please. The scope of domestic violence. It occurs in every culture, every ethnicity, every gender and sexual orientation, in every race, every religion, and in all socioeconomic classes. Because you have seen my picture, you know that I'm an African-American man. And when I have talked across the country on intimate partner violence, on domestic violence, many times white faith leaders and laity have said, well, I know why you do the work, Reverend Miles, because domestic violence happens more among African Americans than it does anyplace else. And that is not true. It does not occur more with African Americans or people of color. It does not occur more with poor people, socioeconomic poor people. It occurs in all races, all religions, and all socioeconomic classes, and in every culture and ethnicity known to humankind. Next slide, please. People often will ask me, what causes domestic violence? As you can see on the slide, it is caused by the conscious decision and willful choice of a perpetrator, of an offender, to use abusive tactics. That's important to repeat, that it is a conscious decision. It is a willful choice. Offenders know exactly what they're doing. Therefore, it's important for us as faith leaders and laity and advocates to understand that the problem is not caused by alcohol or other drugs, even though oftentimes these problems coexist. And domestic violence is not caused by children, not caused by job stress, not caused by psychological illness, not caused by pets. And the last two I really want to bring strongly. Domestic violence is not caused by Satan or any other evil spirit, and especially not by the partner being violated. It is caused by intentionally and willfully saying, I'm going to be violent, I'm going to be abusive to a person that I claim to love. Next slide, please. Some of the contributing factors to domestic violence is the aforementioned encouragement in culture and in families and in society, throughout the media and religious and secular teachings, the encouragement of male entitlement, male privilege, and the demand and encouragement in terms of the subjugation of females within the culture. I was out with a group of advocates, all women, and we went to a movie one evening in this particular city. And the movie that was playing was a Harrison Ford movie, and we all love Harrison Ford. And there was a man and a woman who was working for Harrison Ford, and they both did the job, the project. And Harrison Ford's character turned to the man and said, Johnny, that's an excellent job on the work that you did. Harrison Ford's character turned to the female and said, you know, Sally, you look beautiful in that dress. And we picked it up right away that he's complimenting Johnny on his work, on his brain, on his talent. He's complimenting Sally on her dress, on her body. And it's these kind of things, if you look in magazines, the sexualization of females, the degradation of females' talents and females' call to ministry help to contribute to the elevation of male entitlement, male privilege. Sometimes men will challenge me and say, I don't feel privileged. That makes me even more concerned because it's everywhere. Male privilege and male entitlement are as inescapable as white privilege and white entitlement. And it's important that we recognize that. Next slide, please. We need men to be involved. The first reason that I want to give that why we need men to be involved is something that is obvious to me, but sometimes is not obvious to some of the other brothers around. Domestic violence is a male issue. Domestic violence has been thought of, spoken of for almost 5 decades as a female issue. But it's a male issue. Men cause most of the violence. Men perpetrate most of the violence. Men stand by and allow most of the violence to occur. I always bring up the fact, and I bring it up to men all the time, that most men do not violate their intimate partners, do not violate their children, their pets, their property, the universe. And men begin to relax somewhat. And then I come back and say, but most of the violence that occurs in the society with intimate partners, against children, against pets, property, the universe, in school shootings, in wars, are perpetrated by males. So it's very important to know that we're talking about a gender-based crime and sin when we're talking about domestic violence. So we need men involved to help solve the problems that we've created. We need men involved to help end the destructive cycle of domestic violence. If I'm being abusive to my female intimate partner, I'm talking about I, Al Miles, being abusive to my female intimate partner, to my wife, Kathy. If I'm being abusive, then anything that I would do that is witnessed by our children, male or female, nieces or nephews, or any other males or females who are in my care, is null and void, because I can say domestic violence is wrong, but if I'm not modeling respect and love and nonviolence behavior, then I'm going to perpetuate the destructive cycle of violence. So we need men not only to be involved, but we need men to model egalitarianism, to model love, respect for all humankind. We also need men involved to hope for a better world for our daughters and our sons. It's not just about modeling for our sons, because if I'm modeling violence and abuse and disrespect to my wife in front of our daughters, I'm saying that it's okay for any man to disrespect our daughters. I'm saying to my sons it's okay to disrespect females, female intimate partners, and all other females. When I talk and confront men who use the word bitch and slut and whore, I say to them, when you use those words, you disrespect all females, not only your intimate partners, but your mothers, your grandmothers, and we disrespect ourselves because we're far better than having to use those vulgar words. We need men involved because it's a matter of human dignity and social justice. Because domestic violence is an affront to human dignity and social justice. It is a moral sin and crime, and therefore we need men involved as well as women. And we need men involved because it's the responsibility of all Christians, and especially us faith leaders, to right the wrongs of domestic violence. It is a crime and it is a sin, and we cannot just have it on women's shoulders to stop the violence. We need men involved as well. Next slide, please. There have been historical responses from men to domestic violence. And let me start off with the positive. There have been men since the beginning of the domestic violence assistance movement who have been involved. A small percentage, but there have been men who have listened to, learned from, and partnered with women. These men have willingly sought education and training. They model egalitarianism. They model respect. They are respectful to not only females, but also to other males, and to pets and to property. And they're engaged in the movement, and they have been engaged in the movement. We also have a group of men who know that domestic violence is an epidemic, know that it's wrong, and will speak. They will come up to me and speak about it and say just how wrong it is, but they tend to deny or minimize or approach the issue with silence. So they'll say such things as, domestic violence does occur, and it is wrong, but it does not occur in my church. It does not occur in my family. It does not occur where I work. And some men have gone so far as to say, it does not occur, or it occurs very small in my race. And I said that the historical response from some men has been silence. There's a great deal of male collusion around this issue. So men will hear a man disrespecting his intimate partner, and they'll remain silent. And I will say to these men, remaining silent is saying that you approve of and you agree with this man. Or the men will woman blame. A pastor stopped me recently at a conference, and he said, oh, this is really helpful what you are sharing, Reverend Miles. But wouldn't you agree with the way women dress nowadays? They're asking to be sexually assaulted. They're actually asking to be raped. And I said, no, I don't agree with that at all. She can wear whatever she wants. And in fact, I went a little further and said she could be nude, and a man would still not have a right to touch her unless she said yes. So the woman blaming still happens. What she wears, the makeup she puts on, the way she acts, she talks too much, continues to blame women for the abuse that men perpetrate against women. The historical response has also involved the aforementioned males trying to cling to male entitlement, male privilege, and other patriarchal constructs. There's that sense of, I will have privilege and power no matter where I go as a male. What I'm encouraging men to do is to share that privilege and power with females. I am not asking men to give up that power, because people give us that power no matter what. I can walk into a room or walk outside or be any place, and I'm given that power by females and as well as males. But I am encouraging men to share that power and that privilege with females. We've already talked about male collusions. To the brothers who are joining us, make sure that if you hear a man degrading women, that you speak up and say, that offends me. Don't get into male behavior saying, let's take it outside, buddy. Don't get violent, but definitely say, that offends me. A man one time told me a bawdy joke at a domestic violence awareness conference, and then he looked at me and said, I shouldn't have said that to you. And I said, you shouldn't have said that to anyone. I said, why would you have to put down females? Well, I was just joking. Why do you think it's okay to joke like that? Well, it was just a joke. And I said, so it's okay for a male to say that about your daughter? His response, hell no. So I want us to think about all women as someone's daughter, niece, friend, mother, grandmother. We've heard a lot about the Ray Rice abuse case and the NFL. I need to add to that. When the Ray Rice abuse case came out, I was actually in Baltimore for another meeting, and a reporter came up to me, wanted to know what I thought about it. This is when we only had saw Janae Rice outside of the elevator. And the reporter asked me at this little breakfast restaurant, a so-called man or woman on the street interview, what did I think about that? And I said, well, I think there's more to the story than what we saw outside of an elevator. I said, but I really have something to say to the NFL. And then I went a little further and said, and I have something to say about business, and I have something to say about faith communities, because I hear a lot about zero tolerance for domestic violence, workplace violence, sexual assault, and so forth. And at the time, Ray Rice had a 2-game suspension. The reporter looked at me and he said, obviously you know a lot about this issue, and I told him what my work is, my day-to-day work. I said, but there's more to come. Several weeks later, we saw the video because of what TMZ put out of Ray Rice actually knocking out Janae Rice. And the NFL said, we will suspend Ray Rice indefinitely, we'll terminate his contract. And we had all of this. The NFL took on 4 female colleagues of mine who are internationally known for their work in domestic violence, and we're going to have some new policies. So all of this was happening, and then suddenly nothing. Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which is October, is also National Breast Cancer Awareness Month, both incredible issues, and the publicity is needed in both cases. And I would turn on NFL games and I would see pink ribbons all over the place, or the No More campaign to end violence, and that would be a few commercials, but the NFL executives stopped talking about ending violence against women. And that's been my experience not only in the NFL, but that's been my experience with church organizations and business organizations. We're going to have zero tolerance, and then all of a sudden a high-profile case in which a pastor or another well-thought-of male has been involved, and then it's gone away and it's silence again. But what was equally disturbing with me with the Ray Rice abuse case was the fact that wherever I would go speak, it would come up, I would bring it up if it didn't come up, and people would begin to blame Janae Rice. You know, she married him after he abused her. And I said, those are complicated situations, what survivors go through. Yeah, but she did that. And I said, you're coming dangerously close to blaming her or faulting her. So we did a webinar in front of physicians, and there were a number of medical people, nursing people, and chaplain residents and staff chaplains who were there. And the physician who asked a female physician and myself to lead the webinar, he fielded the first question at the end of the webinar, and he said, you know, that Ray Rice case bothers me. Now, I don't want to blame the victim. And I later said to the chaplain staff, I knew he was going to blame the victim when he said that. I don't want to blame the victim, but you know, she was in his face. You know, she certainly was saying something to him, and I said, it sounds like, doctor, you are blaming Janae Rice. You are blaming the victim. Well, she was all in his face, and I said something that I had said in Baltimore when I was there, and I'm going to say it right now. I said, Ray Rice made his living as a running back with the NFL. If she was in his face, he could have ran away. He could have sprinted away. He did not have to knock her out. And I would like men to stop blaming Janae Rice for being knocked out by her then fiance. Moving away from the NFL and Ray Rice, I would like men to stop blaming women in church, in business, and in any other part of society for the abuse that men perpetrate against women. Next slide, please. So what are we requesting? What are we asking men to do? As I said at the beginning of our webinar, we take on a vital role. We need everyone. We need a holistic approach. So we want men to listen to learn from, and to partner with women. In other words, we want men to become active collaborators with women. Speaking of history, historically, males have been taught to take over, to take charge. And in this situation, we're not asking men, we do not want men to take over. We don't ask men, we're not asking men to claim leadership for this cause that women have mostly been leading alone for 45 to 50 years. We do not want men to take over. We want men to be active partners, to listen to learn from, and to partner. Listening, when I'm saying listening to, we need to listen to the experiences of women, not only victim survivors, but to women and how they are living their lives in this sexist world of ours. We need to listen to their experiences. We need not to get defensive and say, but you know, I really don't have the power, or you know, I really mean well. We need to listen to the experiences. We need to learn, and learning from also involves not only taking coursework in domestic violence awareness, but asking a woman who's in we have relationships with, what can I do? What should I not be doing? What is that like for you? And then we need to be in a partnership. But it needs to be a partnership. It cannot be men claiming to take over. I've seen this happen time and again in the movement, where all of a sudden men say, okay, this is what we're going to do now. And these men have limited qualifications, limited training, and they tend to then just go away after a little while. We're asking men to hold abusive men fully and solely accountable for their actions and behaviors. As I said before, we need to stop woman blaming. We need men who will be willing to say to men, you need help. You need to get help. We need men, and I'm speaking directly to men of faith, especially leaders. We need men when a man who is in our church or in our hospital where we're working or in our care in any kind of way in our business says, you know, go with me to the judge and speak on my behalf. We need men not to go there and say, what a fine man of God is here. We need men to say, I will go with you, Mike. I will go to court with you. As long as you understand, I will tell the judge to hold you fully and solely accountable for your actions and behaviors. So we don't need men to collude. We don't need men to minimize. We don't need men to blame women. We need men to hold the other men fully and solely accountable. We need men to speak up when we witness men making disparaging and comments about women. But not only when we witness men, we need men to speak up when we notice women are making comments about other women. At a recent training in the mainland, we were on a break from the training, and it was a group of women sitting by me, and they were very respectful of me, had my title just right, going on and on how wonderful I am. And then one of the women said something, and another woman had a smile on her face, and she said, bitch, and the women laughed. And I said, I'm uncomfortable with that language, sisters. Oh, yeah, we just joke about that. And I said, but it's a pejorative term, and it puts down women, and I'm not comfortable with it. They apologized, but it was interesting. They apologized to me because I was there, as though I'd never heard the word before, but they didn't apologize to each other. We need men to speak up when women are being put down by men, by women, by our children, by strangers. We need men to speak up. We need men to model, as mentioned before, equality, justice, and peace, and love in all our relationships. A young man came to me at the end of one of my conferences, stood real close to me, and he said, Reverend Miles, thank you for what you said. I want to do what you do. And I said, what is it that you understand that I do? And he says, you go around and you talk about justice and equality and peace for all humankind. And I said, yeah, that's great. I said, how do you want to go about doing that? He says, well, I'm a bit of a vigilante for justice. And I said, young man, I don't know what that means. He said, when my male buddies and I see a man being disrespectful to his woman, his words, his woman, our fist let the man know that we do not agree with him. And I said, so you mean that you use violence to stop violence? And he got this funny look on his face. And I said, I definitely disagree with your response to the violence, because all it does is perpetuate. That's the only way that men can respond, is through violence. I said, instead, talk about equality, justice, peace as a peacemaker, not as somebody who is only known to be as a brute. And then he walked away from me. Next slide, please. As mentioned before, men can help by listening to, learning from, and partnering with women. Men can help by practicing, preaching, and teaching the equal value and equal worth of females and males in both church and throughout society. We cannot be helpful if we talk about the equal value of females and males and then misuse Scripture to support male dominance and support female subjugation. We cannot do that. We have to talk about equality and justice because, again, it's a matter of social dignity and it's a matter of social justice and human dignity. We need to use inclusive language. And here I really want to talk to faith leaders and laity. The exclusive language that I'm talking about, we need to refer to God as God rather than Father God, than God the Father, than Father or Lord. Refer to God as God. We need to say humankind instead of mankind. We need to say sisterhood as well as brotherhood, and children of God rather than sons of God. The reason this is so vital is because the more that we continue to use exclusive language, it's what the old wominists and feminists have taught me over the years. If God is man, then man is God. And if we just say what God, he does, it really devalues more than half of the population who are females. So we need to practice, preach, and teach equality, equal value, not only in church but throughout society. And that includes our language and our behavior in church and throughout society. Next slide, please. We need to be open to examining and, if needed, changing our attitudes, our actions, and behaviors, particularly if our attitudes, actions, and behaviors are offensive. If we're hearing from women or from other men that we tell sexist jokes, or that we put down women, or that we misuse our privilege and our entitlement, we need to consider changing those attitudes, actions, and behaviors. One thing to really monitor about ourselves, if we become defensive when someone calls us on that type of behavior, we need to take a look at that. We need to look at the equal value of females and males throughout society. As we can see on the slide, we need to speak of equality and justice. And we need ongoing attention to our education by attending conferences, roundtable discussions, training events. We need to read materials and focus on domestic violence awareness. We need to be a part of men's marches and rallies that speak out against men's violence against women and against children. To be a part of the solution, we really do need to join the team of women and men who have already been involved in the issue. And that's how we can be of vital help. To conclude, before we turn to questions, our role as men in ending violence against women, especially in intimate partnerships, is vital. It's critical. But to do so, we need to look at ourselves. We need to listen to, learn from women, and partner with women. And we can make the world a much better place. Next slide. I do believe there are some resources, just to highlight the resources of Faith Trust Institute and to highlight the resources of the Joyful Heart Foundation, where they had me do a 7-part series on domestic violence and spiritual abuse. Faith Trust Institute leading throughout not only the United States but throughout the world in matters of how faith and religion and spirituality can be a resource and how it has been a burden to women and children. And Futures Without Violence, they have an initiative about engaging men, covering some of the issues that we've covered today. They're located in San Francisco. Used to be the Family Violence Prevention Fund. They have a lot of valuable resources. And for pastors and laity, the book Domestic Violence, What Every Pastor Needs to Know, that I wrote a few years ago, is important to get the right message about how religion and faith and spirituality can be helpful to the cause of women as well as to men. I'm going to stop now so that we can have time for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Al. That was really wonderful. So I have a couple of questions for you here. Everyone is very enthused about bringing men into the conversation and allying with men. And the question is about if you've seen any programs or strategies that you thought were particularly effective, especially within the faith community, to bring more men into the conversation.
Thank you. Excellent question. One of the things that's been effective is how I got involved. There were a few dedicated sisters in the parish that I was in at the time who would have, there would be different conferences on ending violence against women. This is quite some time ago, but they would always sign me up, check with my administrative assistant, but even more pertinently, check with Sister Miles to make sure that my schedule was free and have me to come and join that particular conference. The thing that I loved about the sisters who invited me to the conference, it was, Pastor Miles, we need you, we need your insights, we need more men to be involved to help. I have seen it work very well like that throughout the country. What doesn't work as well is if it's women saying to men of faith or men in the community, saying, you know, you need to learn this stuff. We need you to do this, because it seems like there's no place at the table for men. But if we talk to men about how we can help, how we can be partners, how we can be allies, more men will get involved. The other example for that is the Faith Trust Institute. When I moved to Hawaii 22 years ago, I had known Marie Fortune's work, but she did not know me at the time. And when she got to know me after my first book, she invited me up for a 3-day training. And the way that she posed it was, Reverend Miles, come up to this training so you can see how we do things up here. Now, I smiled because I knew she also wanted to observe me and to get me added training so that I would have the right message. But it was just the gentle approach and the egalitarian approach that helped versus, Reverend Miles, can you come up here because we don't know what you know and we have to observe you to make sure you got the right message. So I think it's very important. I want to say also to the sisters and brothers who are here listening to this webinar, be very careful when a man gets started to not place him immediately in a take charge role or a leadership role. Observe him for several conferences, because there have been times, because the bar has not been high for us men. Women have taken us in and allowed us to be participants. But if we move along too fast, that's when we get men who all of a sudden start getting the wrong message, or start giving the wrong message and have not been properly trained. So do observe for a long time. When men say that they want to join me at my conference, I'll say, for the first few times when you come to the conference, I don't want you to think you're teaching. You can ask questions, but you need to learn what you need to learn before moving on and being a leader. Excellent question.
Okay, that was great. One more question. Knowing that you've worked with teens dealing with dating violence, is there a difference in the messaging that you suggest in terms of how to talk about violence when you're working with young adults?
It's funny that you would mention that, because having just returned a couple of weeks ago, in which my whole 3 days at this particular Christian university in Southern California was on teen dating violence awareness. So I was dealing mainly with 18 to 21-year-olds. So there were some teens and some young adults. In teen dating violence, and this is going to stray a little bit from our topic, but it's not, because men still need to be involved. In teen dating violence, the ratio of perpetration, what happens, girls and boys are pretty equal in terms of using physical abuse tactics, using emotional abuse tactics, being disrespectful by name. I mean, the names I hear called on Christian campuses as well as secular campuses are disturbing. The aforementioned bitch, slut, hoe, but dickhead, bastard, stupid. That happens a lot. Let me say very clearly that when it comes to sexual abuse tactics in teens, males are still overwhelmingly the perpetrators, females overwhelmingly the victim survivors. Emotional abuse tactics, physical abuse tactics, actually females are more likely to hit, scratch, pinch their partners and threaten to hurt themselves. Males are more likely to hit with force, and males are far more likely to use sexual abuse tactics than are females. So my message is one of respect. I talk about healthy relationships. At this particular university that I've referenced a couple of times, I had a male-only session attended by 25 young men, and we talked about male sexuality. We talked about what's respectful. We talked about what's respectful to ourselves, what's respectful in a dating relationship. And the men couldn't stop talking about it afterwards to their resident assistant and to the women and the men on campus. To the females, they didn't have a session alone, but I talk about respect and respecting themselves, and that it's not their duty. If a man says, you know, I'm a guy, I need sex, I make it very clear that it's not their duty to provide this. And somehow the females have gotten into their heads that it's my role and duty, especially in teen relationships. And I talked about sexually transmitted infections and sexually transmitted diseases, because teens tend to be more naive, even at the training at that university. And it was a Christian university, so some of the professors said, well, they're not having sex because these are Christians. And I said, right. Anyway, even at that university, there were females who said, but we have sex standing up, so I can't get pregnant, or I can't have a sexually transmitted infection. Both males and females said, if we have anal sex. And so there's a naivete, but the core value when I ask male teens and female teens what they want out of a healthy relationship, it's amazing, and national statistics have played this out. It's amazing how they both want similar things: respect, love, want somebody that can laugh, somebody who will treat me respectfully, someone I can have fun with. Not even males are saying, you know, I just want somebody I can have sex with. They're saying, I want somebody I can talk to, I can communicate with. But there's a tremendous amount of pressure on young people in terms of sexuality and on terms of what is healthy and not healthy, both, again, in Christian and in secular, on secular campuses as well. Any other questions or comments?
Okay, one last question. You have been involved in the movement for a long time, and the question is about what gives you hope, because it's hard work.
My big hope is webinars like we're having right now. I mean, Sarah, because of you, Dr. Fortune, and the United Methodist Women Faith Trust Institute, and many other organizations, Joyful Heart Foundation, Futures Without Violence, I'm hopeful because we are bringing to light things that when I did start in the movement almost 30 years ago, we weren't talking about these issues. Certainly, we weren't talking about engaging men because this was being called a woman's issue. Certainly, we weren't talking about how faith communities respond to domestic violence because I was told flat out, mostly by male spiritual leaders, but also by female spiritual leaders, that, well, you know, this is really a secular problem. It doesn't happen within the confines of our church. It doesn't happen among Christians, or it happens less among Christians. We now know that that's not true. I have a great deal of hope. I say all the time, I'm 63 years old, intimate partner violence will not end in my lifetime, but I have great hope that by the time my godson's children are grown, that it will be an anomaly, and it'll be a, wow, this is not happening now the way it used to happen. But I am hopeful because there are a number of young men and women who are stepping up and saying, we want to make the world a better place. At that university that I went to, there were just as many men as women in the audience when I spoke. And when I went to their chapel, they told me, they said, we'll probably get only about 200. And it was full. It was 550 people at the chapel hearing me talk about domestic violence awareness in sermon form. So I'm very hopeful there. The emails that I receive, the text messages that I get from people young and old, spiritual leaders as well as secular leaders, gives me hope that we're really going to address this. And one last thing, and this is not a plug because I'm not naming the church, but the United Church of Christ, I'm not naming the specific location, but the United Church of Christ here in Hawaii has taken it upon itself to have a fall conference this coming Saturday, and nearly 100 spiritual leaders and laity have chosen to come to that conference, where I will be leading them in domestic violence awareness and spiritual abuse awareness, and what we can do as a Christian body to help stop the violence. That keeps me going.
That's great. Thank you. Any final thoughts? That was a pretty wonderful place to end, but if you have any final words.
My final words is to the men and women who are joining us, please know that we need you. Everybody who hears my voice, we need you. We need you involved. Please know your limits. Please know the fact that this is work that has been going on a long time, and we're building upon the shoulders and sometimes the backs, the blood, sweat, and tears of women and some men. But we do need more men and women to continue to be involved, so that when people like myself and many other people in the movement who are in their 60s and 70s now die, we will continue on doing the work of justice. I think that's a good place to end.
Justice is always a great place to end. Thank you, Reverend Miles.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everyone, for joining.
So in just a few moments, you'll be exiting the webinar, and we'd like to ask you to please take a moment and fill out the survey, give us your suggestions for future webinars. And again, we want to thank the United Methodist Women for sponsoring our webinar today. And again, Reverend Miles, thank you for joining us. This concludes today's presentation, and we hope that you'll join us for another webinar soon. Thank you so much.